Hey guys, welcome to Sonali's Book Club, and very excited today. We have uh, big fan of we have Vivek Shanbhag, and so let me first start with Vivek Shanbhag. I'm going to use the book, the back of the book, and read out what this author is like. So Vivek Shanbhag is a Kannada author, editor, and playwright. He founded the pioneering literary journal Deshkala, editing it for 7 years. I've just heard he had a normal corporate job also. So this is something I need to ask him because he's obviously done this as well as the job and written books, my God. Um, his works include the widely translated Ghachar Gochar. Sonali's book club featured this book. That's where I discovered Vivek Shanbhag, and I loved what he had written and the nuances of it. And we went through that conversation. Since then, I've been wanting to talk to Vivek Shanbhag, have a conversation with him, and today I get this opportunity. So I'm really looking forward to it. The book I'm reading from is Sakina's Kiss. This is what he has launched just now. But I think where Vivek Shanbhag is concerned, it's not about this book or that book. He's a prolific author, an amazing mind. And as a reader, this is something I just want to get into this mind, understand how it works, where do the stories come from, and I'm sure you want to do the same. The translator of this book, and I would call him an author too, because he has written his books also, is Srinath Perur. He had translated Ghachar Gochar also, and this is his second book that he has translated. He's translated the book from Kannada, and he's written a travelogue. If it's Monday, it must be Madurai. And of course, these two books that he has translated. But what I would love to say about Srinath is that these books, be it Sakina's Kiss or Ghachar Gochar, don't feel like they're translations. And considering when you look at Indian languages and the kind of rhythm they have, it's amazing that he's got that rhythm in the English language, and kind of the experience that we felt while reading the book, the immersiveness of the experience of this book. I didn't feel like I was not reading in the language that the book was written in. Um, Maybe I don't know Kannada, and maybe people who know Kannada might disagree, but I doubt it because the flow has been so beautiful, and the nuances have been caught so well that it was a pleasure to read this. Let's start with Vivek. How did you start on this journey as a writer? I'm sure you've been asked this question before, but we can't not start it with these questions. We want to introduce you properly and let the audience understand where it all started.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town near Goa, coastal Karnataka, and south of Goa. And my mother tongue is Konkani. It's not Kannada, though I write in Kannada.
Really?
And yes. And then my grandfather was a teacher, and he taught me to read and write at a very early age, maybe when I was 4 years old. And Kannada is a phonetic language. So you can read once you know the alphabets. You may not understand it, but you still read. And then I started reading books, sometimes, and most of the times without understanding. But it was fun reading, children's books, Small Chandamama and this and that. And one of the experiences that I remember is that when I read something and if I don't understand a word, I would go back and ask my grandfather. Sometimes I would wait for him to come back and tell me the meaning of that word. And this became a kind of a game where, I would wait and think what would be the possible meanings for the word. And once he tells me the meaning of that particular word, the entire sentence illuminates with its different meaning. So it was, and now when I look back with the benefit of hindsight, I feel my curiosity with the language started maybe at that time. Because Kannada was not spoken at home, it was outside, and I had not yet started going to school. So it was a kind of learning, it was a kind of adventure, it was a kind of, many, many exciting things with that small little game.
Also, what an amazing imagination exercise for a child.
Yeah.
This is what This, I
Yeah.
think, to do with the young kids, because just imagine getting when was it that you think when you would ask this question to your grandfather and all the imagination that you had about what this word could mean, when did you start kind of getting that right?
I think maybe when I was probably 7 years old, because once I started going to school, then my exposure to Kannada was more. Because then I went to a Kannada medium school, and then the outside world was Kannada. So the access to Kannada was much more once I entered the world outside. So it is at that time that I started getting most of the things right, and that's how I got into reading, which ultimately led me to be a writer.
So when did you start writing actually? I mean, were you writing even in school?
I was very much interested, but my first story was published when I was 16, and it won a award in a competition of not children's competition, but competition of adults.
Okay.
So I was very thrilled with it. It was something. It was run by a big journal, and I
Mhm.
was very thrilled to get that prize in that award, and which is how it started. And my first book was published when I was 22. It was a collection of short stories.
Wow, first short story published at 16, book at 22.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you were a published author from 16, but the writing, when did you really start writing actually? Because so many of us, without
Yeah.
being published, are also authors and writers.
I think I started writing when I was about 12, 13. And
Ah,
interestingly, in those days, I was very much into religious texts and philosophical texts, because you see the Indian philosophy and something related to that was very exciting, and it was very challenging. It was like mathematics to me, and I felt more and more I read about it. It was more and more it became complex, and at that age you like these challenges. So I really got deeper and deeper into it. But at some point in time, I started reading literature, and then which took me out of that, and then made me realize that this world and this literature is in fact more complex and than the cerebral arguments and the narratives that are presented in those books. So that's how I got into literature. But I started writing around the age of 14. I
interesting.
first wrote a few poems, and then I moved into prose.
Have you always written in Kannada only, or did you ever try writing in, say, Konkani and English?
No, I grew up with five languages, because one is Konkani in my house, which was my mother tongue, and then also Marathi, because my mother studied in Marathi medium.
Okay.
Though we are from Karnataka, because in those days it was part of Bombay Presidency. So there are many Marathi schools. And then Hindi, because of a certain circumstance in my house. My mother's sister stayed with me, and so she taught us Hindi. And of course, Kannada and English in school. So that's how I grew up with five languages.
Mm.
And uh, I never see, I feel that there is a certain connection required with a language, very intimate and deep connection for one to be a fiction writer in any language. And for me, that connection is with Kannada. I've written in English, but non-fiction, but I have never attempted to write fiction, because I don't think I can write fiction in English, because it requires certain, when you write fiction, it requires certain flow, which must come without effort. You write a word, the next word must come to you and it must surprise you. You write a sentence, the next sentence must surprise you. That kind of a thing, which just happens almost automatically, doesn't happen to me with English. It may happen to me with English when I do maybe some technical work or some management thing or maybe something else, because that is the area I
Language
studied.
of learning, probably.
Yeah, but with fiction, it is always with Kannada.
That's what comes from your heart, and that's the language
Yes,
in
yes,
your heart.
yes.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, both the books have been translated by Srinath, and obviously you've liked the first book, and hence Srinath has translated the next book also. From language, we come there because what was it like when first time when Srinath? Uh, how did you both get together? What was it like? I mean, how did you select Srinath? Did Srinath select you? How did this combination happen? that you could, because when you write and your story or your novel is like your baby, how did you get the confidence to entrust your baby to Srinath?
See, I knew Srinath even before he translated the work. And he had shared some of his writings with me, creative writing stories. He is a creative writer. I consider him a creative writer. And though he has not published a book of stories yet. And then he published his travelogue. And I liked it very much because the kind of humor, the kind of insightfulness in that book is something that moved me. And I went to Srinath and asked him if he would be willing to translate this book, Gajar Gochar.
Right.
And and he was not very sure in the beginning because he had not translated any book, and not translated anything for that matter. And then after 3-4 days, he got back saying that he will do it. And then the journey started. But I must say that our discussions most of the time was not about the meaning of a sentence or a word, but it is more about what is beneath the text. And most of the time, our discussions are about the narrative structures, not just with my novel, but then in general about literature, because it is very important to understand the mind of a writer if you want to translate well. And Srinath has excellent literary sensibilities. The other thing which he did not reveal to you is that he is a PhD in computer science from IIT Bombay. So he has, there is a different mind working there, and he can see things from different perspectives. And he's very imaginative with his words. So that worked out very well for us. And it was also a very great friendship that has resulted in this.
So Srinath, I would like to ask you about this. Like he said that he came to you with it. You had never translated before this. You're a creative writer. You obviously would love to write your stories. What was it like when he came to you? What was it that went through your mind first? What was the first thought?
It's true that he came to me asking me if I would be interested. But also, I was keen to work with the Kannada language because Kannada is my mother tongue, but I studied in the English medium. And at some point, I lost Kannada as a literary language, which is important for insights into the larger world. So I was looking somewhat for a project to do which involved Kannada. And so when he approached me with this idea, I read the book and I loved it. I wasn't sure if I'll be able to do justice to it, so which is why I told him, look, I've never done this before. But I was thrilled at the possibility of working on something substantial to do with Kannada, and so I was very happy to say yes to him. And
so, what was the journey like then?
Actually, to some extent, it was. I imagine it would be like acting to some extent, because with Ghachar Gochar, there were parts of the narrator's psyche which I could identify with, and I used those as an entry point into his, into his head and into that voice, which I think is the most important thing, because translating the words and sentences themselves is all right; it's quite simple, but being able to convey mood and feeling, the thing that Vivek says is between the lines. How do you translate what is unsaid? That is, I think, the challenging part, and it is also in some way an easy thing because once you get into that flow, I think it sort of takes care of itself. So I repeatedly translated the first few pages with Ghachar Gochar. And once I thought that, yes, I've somehow caught something of this narrator's character.
Sense of it.
Yeah, and from then on, it was very easy. So
yeah, so the tough part was cracking the first few pages, and then you could kind of.
Yes, I did those repeatedly, and once I sort of got into it, where I felt that I've explored that character's voice enough that I can do more things with it, so I can carry it through the book. So that's when it sort of became fairly simple. It was, yeah.
You gave the example of an actor in that sense, and I agree with that because entering that entry point into the character, understanding it, and getting into the head. And the first day on the set, the first few readings are always difficult, and then as you go on, and now that we have OTT, it's not just a film, but you do seasons. The second season is always so much more easier, and then you look back and you feel that my God, I was stressing about it so much and I was so scared. And why did it take me so long? And why was this time why was it so much more simpler? And absolutely, I understand what you're saying in that process. But tell me, you had written a travelogue, and this was a story, the character, the whole the kind of writing was different. So what were were there any challenges for you? What was that process like for you?
My main challenge was that my Kannada wasn't great at all. So I was a very slow reader of Kannada. I'm now slightly better thanks to having translated. This is the third translation I've published. There was one in between the two novels of Vivek. So initially the challenges were almost mechanical. That is just actually reading in Kannada and understanding it well enough. Uh, so those were really my basic challenges. And as I said, once I got the voice of the character, and I had written fiction before, I'd written short stories, I published a few short stories, and I even put together a collection of short stories which I did not publish because I thought it was of more interest to me. So writing fiction, I'd studied the craft before. So that really was familiar to me. I mean, so it wasn't an alien world for me. So once I actually, sort of cracked the narrative voice, it went quite smoothly. So the main challenges I had initially were with the Kannada language,
So
and
when
it was invaluable to have someone like Vivek who also speaks English, perfectly well and can read English. So what emboldened me to, take some freedom and try and be creative in the translation as well was the knowledge that he's going to read it in English, and he's going to tell me if something doesn't match his intention or his vision for the novel. So that was extremely helpful as a first time translator for me.
so like Vivek said, that it was about the conversations that you've had, and it's basically when you get into the character's psyche, you obviously had to get into the writer's psyche also, and which was where Vivek came into play. So nobody better than you to tell us how do you look at the psyche of the characters in Ghachar Ghochar or in Sakina's case and Vivek himself? What are the how similar are they, or how dissimilar are they? What is it about him in these characters? Because see, both the books, if you see both the characters, the narrators of the story are pretty much sort of middle-aged male voice that you hear in this. So how do you connect that, and what did you find? Because we will never be, you've got that, what do I say, the front row seat into this mind of Vivek's. So please tell us about it.
Uh, I I don't think Vivek corresponds completely with his characters, although the superficial similarities do exist. So, for example, in Sakina's case, this is a person who works in a technology company, who's a fairly affluent, a typical Bangalore middle class tech industry type person. And Vivek too has had a corporate career. In fact, as I was telling you before we started this conversation, one of the things I admire greatly about him is that he was able to keep a full-time corporate career going and produce really great fiction. And he used to wake up early in the morning and do all this. No, I don't. I think knowing Vivek helped in terms of knowing his literary sensibility, knowing what he found interesting about the world, how he viewed other authors and other books. So that was really much more insightful than knowing Vivek himself, because I think Vivek is a different person than his characters. So there's no doubt about that at all. So I don't think in terms of the characters, it really helps to know Vivek.
Yeah.
But definitely in terms of what he's trying to achieve as a novelist, as a writer of fiction, there it really helps to know Vivek.
Okay.
So I think the circumstances of his characters might match things that he knows from real life, but the kind of knots in their heads that he's dealing with and
Yeah.
how they correspond to larger things in society. Sakina's case, for example, as you know, we are looking out through from the head of one man, but there is so much about our world that it takes in. So I
Yeah,
think
and so
he's
many nuances about the world that we
yeah.
live in. And
Yeah.
it could be Bangalore, it could be anywhere. In fact, it could be anywhere in the world today. And the characters and what they're going through is so relatable. I mean, there are so many times when you're reading the book and you say, I can identify with this. Oh my God, is this what I'm doing? Is this what I'm going to lead to? And it makes you think, and that's the beauty of the books, because the story. It's not like a huge book. They are fairly small books, shorter stories, but they make you think so much. There's nothing you can't read. You need a couple of days to just recover from the book, because as you go through the day, I mean, this is what happened to me. As I went through the day, there were moments when I would do something and say, is this what I'm doing? And you start noticing the small things that you're doing when you're listening to people or you're forming opinions about people. And is this where my opinion is leading? You start questioning yourself and what you take for granted and what you don't really think about. And that's the thing about good books. They make you think, and authors like you, where you make us think, and that's the beauty of it. And I love that. But tell me, Sakina's case now, what made you come up with this idea? What was the thought behind it? What triggered the book?
See, there is no one particular incident or an event that triggered the book, but there is something that I have been thinking about, which has influenced greatly the writing of this, which is I feel that in the last 25 years in our country, there have been significant changes after the globalization, so many changes, and we have not fully understood them, but we pretend to understand them, and we behave in a certain way. There's so many things. I mean, money is one, empowerment of women is another, intolerance to this empowerment is the other one. There's so many things that are happening, and the family, the structure inside the families are threatened. The relationship between a husband and a wife is strained. So there are so many things, and we pretend that we understand it, but actually we don't, and we blame someone or the other for it. Sometimes we blame the globalization, sometimes we blame the politics, sometimes we blame someone else. But that's all to console ourselves. But in reality, the complexity of this is too much. And I was trying to grapple with it and trying to see if I can capture this in a work. And that is how the narrative and the story of Sakina's Kiss was born.
Even in Ghachar Gochar, you're talking about the money and the relationship with the money. And how do you look at it in today? Like, you mentioned last 25 years, but the relationship with money and what is happening to us in the society today, how do you look at it? I mean, from the time you wrote about it in Ghachar Gochar, what is it that you're noticing? Are there any changes? Have we gone more down the same path, or is there any redemption for us? How do you look at that?
Yeah, money was an excuse to understand that change. Money is only one aspect of it. But I think there are many other things that have happened, which is what I was trying to capture in Sakina's case. Because the change is, since we're talking about money, see, money in terms of absolute terms, it's not much that the middle class or the lower middle class has got. But in relative terms, it's a lot. From where they were to where it is taking them, there is a huge gap. And that gap has made people aware of what their self is. And they are now willing to explore that self. So unfortunately, that thing is now, there is an onslaught of technology. And people have access to the minds of these people. So it can go any which way, we don't know. So also the literacy in our country, it was also at a stage, and it has exploded in the last 25 years. Again, as a result of this relative change in financial status of the people. So all these things have happened. So in Ghachar Gochar, I took money as a means to explore this change and to examine this change. But in Sakina's case, it's a different thing. It's the family itself is at a different level. And the patriarchy and all those things, it's just, we think that it is with illiterate people, uneducated people, which is not so. It is most dangerously deep in the society, everywhere.
Well educated.
Everywhere, yeah.
Yeah. I hear you on that. In Sakina's case, the thing that was very, very intriguing and interesting for me was the relationship with the teenage daughter.
Yeah.
And definitely because I'm at that point in my life. And what is it that, like in our community with the parents who are there and everything, what was this relationship with teenagers and how it's going, and what could you just be a little more elaborate a little bit more on this relationship that you see, because there's a definite perspective to it, and which we as parents sometimes are so into it and not probably not looking at it, but I definitely want your insight into that.
Yeah, it is as in the novel. It is like we think that we understand, and we recognize that there is an individual who is different from us or from the protagonist of the novel. But he wants to understand. He wants the daughter to reveal everything to him, so as he wants his wife to reveal everything to him. There is a conversation. There is a dialogue to this effect in the novel. This is, I have told you everything. No, tell me everything. So I think it is also some kind of an arrogance that we can understand everything,
Yeah.
despite this generational gap. And I think that arrogance has also come because of the developments in technology. And we feel that we can understand everything. The world, the mysteries of the world, we feel uh, are not very far away from us. It is within reach. All these things play on our minds, and then we think that we can understand a person. It is not so easy.
Also, I felt that somewhere where you look at, the relationship between the father and the daughter, he talks about the education that he has given the daughter, the best that money could buy. That thing was about the best that the money could buy. And you gave the daughter that education, and now she has an opinion of her own, and he has a problem with that.
Yeah.
And somewhere as a parent, that's what happens from the time from babies, where you're kind of on top of everything and know what is happening, to when they start having this personality of their own, very difficult to let go of.
Yeah.
And it's really not fair the way you kind of leave us hanging at the end of it, and we really don't know where it goes. And maybe you should write sequels about it, but we need to know the story. What do you think are the possibilities? What could have happened at the end? You have to give us something to hold on to.
Yeah, see, the open endings are not something that is done because I don't know how to end it, or something that maybe I could have written a page more and said what has happened. But I feel that it is done. First of all, it is not that all my novels are open ending novels, but then I feel in this particular case there is something that is required for the reader to not know, reader to think about it, and also to, with every possible option that you think would have happened, we invest in it. And we also take moral responsibility to accept an option. Let's say there are two options or three options or four options. One of the things, if we think that, look, this is how it ended, and we believe so, it also says something about us as readers. So this is something that, see, it's a very risky thing to leave to do an open ending, because if it doesn't work, it really falls flat. But the belief is that you would have got enough experience going through the text, going through the novel, that not knowing the end of the story, the storyline is not so important, but the experience of that, understanding the characters, getting into the minds of those characters, that is more important for me as a writer, and especially in this particular novel.
A personal question.
Yeah.
You understand the teenage mind so much because you have kids of your own. Do you have kids of your own, as the question?
I have two kids, but then I don't have a daughter, unfortunately.
So you have kids, and this is the insight into the teenage mind has been amazing. What would you tell your kids if your kids were to uh, read? What would your books to them be? The gift of books that you would give your kids, what would those books be?
I would give Tolstoy.
Okay.
Because something that is, he has captured the complexity, and Dostoevsky.
Okay.
That's what I have given them when they were able to read, and even when they were teenagers.
Hmm.
So these are my favorite writers, and then some Indian short story writers like Bashir, the Malayalam writer, the fantastic writer. So these are the kinds of stories I would like them to read.
What would your if our community want to read something in Kannada, what would you suggest that they should read? Which are the authors that have influenced you and you would suggest that they should be read in Kannada?
Yeah, the author that influenced me most is called Yashwant Chittal, to whom I have dedicated the Gachar Gochar.
Right.
Then there was a writer called U. R. Anantamurthy, a very well-known writer. And then Lankesh, another writer. And Devnur Mahadeva, who is a very powerful writer, who is still around who is still with us today. And then there is another writer called Purnachandra Tejasvi, a very interesting writer. And then from the older generation, Shivram Karanth and Kuvempu. And poets, Bendre,
Oh,
the greatest poet, the greatest modern Kannada poet is Bendre.
yeah. I take it the last name from there, but
Yeah.
none of that creativity, I would say.
He spoke Marathi at home, Bendre.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. But Srinath, what I want to know from you is that once you had read Vivek's book and you was going into translating it, did it make you want to read more Kannada authors? Did you read any more books in Kannada?
Yes, definitely, yes, yeah. And
Did
in
you
fact,
add any more authors to the list that Vivek has given us?
I haven't read enough in Kannada, but it's been great knowing Vivek because he's given me wonderful reading lists. So I read a lot of Shivram Karanth, I read a lot of Tejasvi, whom he mentioned, and some poetry by Bendre, which is out of this world. And as a translator, I can say that it is ridiculously difficult to translate Bendre because he was a sort of mad genius, and I think even to translate Bendre, one has to be something of a mad genius oneself. So yes, I mean, through translating Vivek, it's also opened up the world of Kannada literature for me to some extent. Yes.
But tell me, what was your influence? Which authors were you influenced by, Srinath, as you grew up?
I read mostly in English,
Mm.
and I had an aptitude for writing from a very young age, for reading and for writing, but it didn't really come into the form of publishing something until I was much older. But we had a British Council library here. My school had a good library, and it's through authors like P.G. Woodhouse, for example, the fact that you can make someone laugh through words. I think I learned that from Woodhouse. From R.K. Narayan, I learned that the world around us is possible to describe in a meaningful and insightful way. And authors like Graham Greene and Nadine Gordimer, I read them before I was old enough to understand what they were saying, but it was enough for me to get the idea that life is messy and complicated, and literature can be used to deal with that messiness. So it was authors like that I grew up reading.
Vivek told us that he was reading philosophy at a certain point before he discovered literature. So that definitely has shaped him and as a person and his writing. And you can see the nuances in it. And uh, uh, what was what was the reading that you were doing at that age which has shaped you, you feel?
I think all these authors that I just mentioned, I think they all had some part in shaping me, and I read widely and indiscriminately. And I think just the idea of literature where you inhabit other consciousnesses, right? So I didn't study literature. I went, like Vivek, I'm an engineer too. So I went on to a career in technology, and then I stopped that at some point. I thought I'll take a short break and get back to it, but I forgot to go back. So now I'm stuck here.
Thank God you're stuck here. But tell me, if you're stuck here, as you say, which means what do you enjoy more, writing your own or translating the book? I mean, different processes. Which process are you enjoying more?
So I do think of translating as an act of writing. That is that, yes, there is an original work, but I feel like I have to understand and internalize. And when I'm actually writing it out on the page, it has to be created afresh in a way. So it's a strange tightrope walk of sorts, because you're both leaning on an existing text as well as creating a new one that is fresh in its own way, because otherwise it doesn't work. You cannot simply transfer linearly, because you
Has
have
it ever
to.
happened that when you're translating and you feel like you know that there are certain boundaries because you're leaning on a text, as you said, but
Yeah.
there are times when you feel like maybe I could take this liberty. Can I add this on? I wish I could add this on. Those kind of feelings has that ever happened in this process that you've been through?
Sometimes things write themselves, and and it just occurs in the moment. So one thing is, if I'm writing a funny scene, then it needs to make me laugh. If I'm writing a sad scene, it needs to make me feel a kind of heaviness. And even if it's there in the original, I need to invoke the words that will transfer it into another language. And there are, so for example, in Sakina's case, to answer your question with a very specific example, there is a scene in the bus where this teenage daughter wants to ignore her parents, and so she sort of closes her eyes, and in the English it says she put her headphones into her
Right.
ear or something. That isn't there in Kannada, but
Oh, really?
yes, but what teenager today will not put her headphones into her ears when she wants to ignore her parents? So it sort of it just came out of my fingers all by itself, and I left it there knowing that Vivek is going to read it, and if he has an objection, he will raise it. But he didn't, so it remains in the English. So there are small things like that that do go into it, I suppose.
Is there anything more like that where the other characters are concerned? The mother's character, did anything else come in there, or with the father's character? Were there any more additions like this, which are so interesting for us as readers?
No, I can't think of anything else right now of that sort. But a lot of what happens
I
also
can give,
is that
I can give an example from Gachar Gochar, but you go on, Srinath. I'll give it later.
no. So Sonali, you were saying at the beginning of this conversation that it's Sakina's Kiss is a very slim book, and and the thing is, it's a very concentrated book as well. Both this and Gachar Gochar, they're extremely concentrated, and Vivek puts a lot of work into making them that way, and it gives it a certain punch because of that reason. So
But that's
I
exactly
can,
why I said that they appear to be slim and they appear
yeah,
to be
yeah.
very short reads, but they hold on to you much longer. And that's because of the density of
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. And just to give an example of how much thought has gone into what goes into the book, our agent, after reading it in English, asked Vivek, this family in Sakina's case, they take a bus to go back to the village. So an affluent, family that's working in tech, won't they have a car? And Vivek said, "What do you mean? They have two cars. I have just not mentioned it in the book." So, so he takes he takes
You
great.
have actually, you mentioned how they were, they when they bought the apartment, they brought two parking spaces also. That's
Yeah,
mentioned in the book,
it is.
actually.
He added it later, I think, after this
Oh, really?
conversation happened. Yeah, yeah. It wasn't there at that point, but he knows far more about the characters and the worlds than he gives out in the book. So someone else called him stingy with his words, which is also not a bad way to describe him. So I don't take too many liberties of this sort. Really, my liberties are more in terms of rearranging. They don't match sentence for sentence.
Okay.
So he may have three long sentences in a paragraph, but in English, I'm trying to convey the mood of that, the essence of the information that it contains, and
Yeah.
what function it's playing in the novel. So this in English may have a different form. It may not be three long English sentences. It may be two small ones and two long. It could change, or the order of those sentences could change. So most of the liberties I take are of that nature.
But
So
definitely, that's why when you read it, you can, you don't feel like it was not written in English. So yeah, that's
yes.
definitely.
So very rarely I become mischievous and add a headphone or something in the story. It's probably the only thing in Sakina's because there's nothing else there.
So, but Vivek has a story for us from Gachar Gochar. What was it that he added there?
But to add to what Srinath is saying, see what happens is in translation that the same sentence in Kannada When you read it in Kannada, it evokes certain memories. The same sentence in English may not evoke the same memories. So Srinath talked about bringing that unsaid from one language into the another. So one has to be aware of what this unsaid is and what kind of memories that Kannada sentence is evoking and how to work very closely to evoke the same memory and same feeling. So that is really important. And this is the kind of discussion that we have. When I said we are not discussing the meaning of a sentence, this is exactly what we most of the times we discuss. I mean, not directly, but sometimes indirectly, and so on. And I must say, if you take Gajagochar, for example, I mean, every sentence that is there in Kannada is there in English, but it is written in a slightly different way, and it gives you a different, because you can't change the sentence. I mean, as Srinath was saying, but then it is rendered in such a way that it is very much in line with the swabhava of English. English has a certain character. Each language has a certain character. So has Kannada. Now, coming back to the thing that he added in Gajalgochar, there is a episode where mother wakes up in the night and she is in the middle of the night and looking for ants. And this narrator comes and he looks at her, and that entire paragraph was in a very light tone. And when Srinath had done that, we had this discussion. So I was telling him it's not light enough. Something has to be done, and something. So that was the kind of discussion that we have had. And then he added a word, which is added a sentence, which is like Amma resorted to chemical warfare, and that suddenly lifted the whole thing up. That is something that I can't write that sentence in Kannada.
Right.
It just won't. Which is why I said the kind of memories that it evokes in Kannada and English are different. So that sentence is not in Kannada, but it is there in English.
So that means both of you getting to know each other. How much time do you think you've spent together? And what do your families have to say about it?
No, in a sense that it is, we've spent quite a lot of time together. Sometimes over phone, sometimes meeting. But I think more of that is to understand each other. So recently, Srinath was saying, I'm tired of being in your mind. So
Oh my
I
God,
want to do something different.
well said.
So, yeah.
Oh my God. So when you say tired of being in his mind, I mean, it just evokes such a visual. And but it's true. Do you really feel you lost yourself somewhere a bit by being in his mind for so long? Because it happens when you get into characters. There are times when, if you're not able to get yourself out of it, you do get carried away into it. Method acting, a lot of actors you see going through that. So that's a very interesting way. I never thought a person who's translating from a regional language into English language or from any language, this is what you're actually doing. You're into the mind of the writer and you're living in that mind, and that can be quite exhausting. You're right.
Yeah, there was this translator called Lakshmi Kannan who said a translator shows only half his face to the world. And I think it's true. And no, I was joking when I said I'm
No, but
living in your head.
I'm sure you
But
were joking, but it's
yeah,
a
yeah,
very, it's so true, and
yeah.
it's so, yeah. Maybe you were not really exhausted with it in that sort of a way, but it is a thought. I mean, you've been living in somebody else's mind and being that person for so long. How exhausting is it?
Yeah, no, actually, I'm finishing translating a novel of Vivek's that I started many years ago. And it has its narrative is half in the first person and half in the third person. And I felt a distinct relief when I got to the third person because it's not only Vivek's mind, it's also the character's head.
Right.
So I think it's always a pleasure of some sort to go out of anyone's uh, consciousness for a bit. But I think one of the things, but being more serious about this, one of the things that has made sure that I don't completely get tired of doing this is that I do my own writing as well. So I write about science, I write about travel. There've been a couple of short stories along the way. I write about books. So I do long form journalism, and a lot of that. I mean, it's actually most of what I do. Most of
Into
my
your
time doesn't
role
go
and
in
then you go
translation.
back into this. Sorry.
Yeah. So actually, I mean, I'm not translating for the majority of the time in a year or anything. So there are these concentrated phases where this happens, and then I do my own work. It's just not being produced in the form of books, but there is a good amount of my own writing that I put out as well. In fact, one of the things I enjoyed doing a great deal last year was this story for National Geographic magazine, where I followed elephants for about a year and people who study elephants. And we did this, I did this really
What
interesting story
called?
about
Please,
what
I
is
would
going
love
on with
to.
elephants. And
Sorry,
so
what was it called? I would love to see it.
it's the cover story of the May 2023 issue of National Geographic. And for
Okay.
more than a year before that, I was researching the story and traveling to different places and accompanying researchers in the wild. So following a herd of elephants on foot and so on. It's such a thrilling experience.
So
Uh,
Vivek, it was from your mind into the elephant's mind.
Yeah.
yeah, but I keep doing something or the other, which doesn't involve being in somebody else's head. So
I'm sure.
But
So,
I must also say that as a writer, I have learned a lot from Srinath,
mm,
because when I feel that every fiction writer must go through this process of translation,
mm,
because many things, when they pass the gate of translation, they become something else. And that something else meaning I'm trying to make a point, so I'm exaggerating it. But something that sounds so profound in a language, when translated, might sound very silly.
mm,
Especially this happens especially with poetry.
mm.
So this experience of getting translated, seeing your works getting translated into another language, teaches us a lot. And especially with Srinath and the discussions that we have had, and his imagination about English and his language, and many things that we discuss. I think that has taught me a lot as a fiction writer. And I feel it is important for one to be aware of this aspect of craft.
Right. You know, so much of this, definitely in our country, and I always feel that because I don't read so many languages, and I feel like I'm stuck in a slot because I'm reading only English, and there's just amazing amount of talent and books that could be read, which for me I'll have to be dependent on translations. Uh, do you think there should be more translations? What do you think is the way forward? How do you think we can get about getting more amazing works translated from regional language? And a couple of questions here. And could you, end this by telling us who do you think are those authors that definitely need to be translated? Both
Yeah,
of
there
you.
are two.
I would like
Yeah,
input from both of
yeah,
you.
yeah. In India, we have one is translations into English. That's one part of it.
Mm.
But translations between Indian languages have been happening, and have been happening for centuries. It's there is nothing new.
Right.
But unfortunately, now in the last few decades, I mean, last 20, 25 years, that number has come down. And number has come down for various reasons, because the borders have become very thick. And because earlier in those borders, as I told you, my mother studied in Marathi medium.
Mm.
So we had many Marathi translators coming from the border area. Similarly, Malayalam translators coming from Kerala border. Similarly, Tamil Nadu. So those things are now becoming less and less because of various political reasons. So the schools, the Kannada schools in Tamil Nadu or Tamil schools in Kannada, they're in Karnataka. They are not as many as they were 30 years ago. So that's one reason why these translations are not happening as much as they were happening a few years ago.
So
That means
interesting.
that,
You said that
sorry?
the borders have become thicker. Is that what you said?
Yes,
Not as
yes,
porous as they were.
yeah,
And
yeah,
actually, when you look at it, the world has shrunk so much, and we are so much more into each other's cultures and lives.
yeah.
And yet, so I thought this would have been more, and you're telling me exactly the opposite, and I hadn't thought of that. You're so right. I mean, this is so man-made. That means, human-made these thickness of these borders. There was more of it. And now when we have the tools where we can use them, is when our borders have become thicker. My
Yeah.
God, that, that's
So,
interesting.
and we can see that, I mean, very clearly in terms of number of translators that we have. they are dwindling over years. So that's one aspect to it. Second is, as a result, we are depending more and more on English, because that hunger to read works from other languages, that is always there. That was always there, and that was to large extent was satisfied because of these translations between Indian languages. Now that is coming down, the translations into English are increasing. And you can see that in the last few years, and especially in the last 10 years, there have been so many translations coming from Indian languages into English. And there is a reason for it. It is also that a lot of people are now studying in the English medium. So English is becoming their first language. So they also know Indian language. So we are getting good translators, because a translator must have English as her first language if one has to translate into English. And that's very important, because that connection that I talked about with the writer and fiction is absolutely essential for a translator as well.
So basically what you're saying is that now we are at that period where actually more translations can be done and we could have a variety of them. And
Yes.
the field is open for that. Any particular author from any particular region that you feel I wish was translated?
I mean, I've already read a few. Like, for example, there is a Malayalam writer called Benjamin, a young writer. Some of his works are available. Very good writer. Similarly, Jai Mohan from Tamil is again a very good writer. And of course, there are many other writers, I mean, whom I have read and grown up reading. But I have read them in Kannada, some of them in English. But then all these writers from Malayalam, Tamil, Marathi, all these I have read them in Kannada. And I wish that English readers must also have a chance to read them.
Right. Srinath, would you like to add any names to this list?
One of the writers we talked about, Purnachandra Tejasvi, is someone I believe, some of his books exist in translation, in English translations, but I don't think they're available, they're out of print. And he's very prescient, because he's written about the environment and ecology and the relationship of humans with the environment. And he did this, a couple of decades before it started getting the kind of attention it has today globally, I suppose. So I think it's, these stories of larger human interest, it's always interesting to look at how they play out in a small community in different parts of the world. So I think it is of great interest to the world, and I hope some of his works get translated. But other than that, I agree completely with what Vivek is saying, that we need more pairs of languages, between which translations take place. So Ghachar Gochar, for example, they use my English translation to take it into many other languages. Not in India, though. In India, several languages. I think it was done through the Kannada original. And I think Bengali happened through the Hindi and my English. But the languages of the world, all the European languages, Turkish, Chinese, Hebrew. So the translators worked from the English. And I think it is, it would be wonderful if we could somehow find a way to have direct translations, because languages differ in structure. And when you use an intermediate language, it is always limiting in some sense. So I'm not at all sure how that works out. So I wish we could have more pairs of languages where there are translators who are doing active work.
Yeah, but somewhere I would say that we would rather have the translations than not really have them at all. So, I mean, just imagine the human interest, the story is so identifiable, be it in Hebrew, be it in Turkish, be it in, any European languages. That's the beauty of it. And how amazing from being
if I can
translated in the same work. I mean, an amazing journey.
You said you would rather have them translated. So someone once, I think, told Vikram Seth at a lit fest of some sort. They said, reading poetry in translation is like kissing someone through a veil. What do you have to say? And he said, I would rather kiss someone through a veil than not kiss them at all. So,
Exactly. I agree with that totally. Yeah. But what a wonderful list of books you've given us. And I think for my members, I would say that, at the end of it, we will make a list of it and I will put it out so that we have all of you who are interested in regional authors, you have a lovely, fantastic reading list after this conversation that you can look into and get yourself all those books. It's been wonderful talking to both of you, and I can't wait for what is coming next. So are you both translating, I mean, like after Ghachar Gochar and Sakina's case, is there something that you both are doing together? What are you doing, Vivek, separately? And Srinath, what are you doing separately? I would love to know, what do both of you have in future for us?
Yeah, I'm working on a novel. And when, I must say this, when we translated Ghachar Gochar, it was not my recent work. We chose that because it was the shortest of my novels. So I've written after Ghachar Gochar also, published in Kannada. Yeah, so now I'm working on a new novel in Kannada.
Okay. And sorry, yeah, Srinath, are you translating anything of his which has come in between Sakina's case and Ghachar Gochar?
Yes, yes. I'm working on a novel called Uru Bhanga in Kannada.
Oh.
So I'm midway through it. Hopefully
Okay.
it will be done in some time. And
which is the sometime, like next year?
Publishing is a slow process, so it's not really in our hands when, but hopefully we'll be done with it in a few months, and then it's up to the whims of publishing when it comes out actually. So other than that, I'm interested in a few things like prehistory in the Indian subcontinent and so on. So I've been doing some research and travel around that. So I'm not sure what form it will take finally, but it will be writing of some sort. So I'm working on that in the background as I do this.
Amazing. Anything which is fiction?
No, not at present, no.
But at some point, yes, I'm sure you will.
Maybe. I've learned from the best after all. So
Let's hope so. Srinath, Vivek, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I'm sure we can continue, but looking forward to your new books, both the new one, Vivek, and the translation. And Srinath, I'm really looking forward to this prehistoric India. This is a topic that is one of my favorites, and I'm really looking forward to reading what you come out with. And all the best. And I hope to see you on Sonali's book club soon. Looking forward to that conversation too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.